Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. I hope you and yours are well. Been our busy week, lots going on, and you'll see we've got a couple of new faces here, and a couple of old faces, real old faces on here as well. And well, let me get started with welcoming to today's podcast. And this is going to happen quite a lot between now and Election Day and May the 7th, folks. You know, there'll be times when Eva and Phil are out campaigning as well, and we're going to have all sorts of different people, but as many of the candidates as we can possibly in here, so you can get to know them, get to see them, and hear what they've got to say, hear some different voices. And I'm delighted to welcome, firstly, for standing in Moray for the Alliance to Liberate Scotland, it's Allan Duffy. Allan, welcome to Through a Scottish Prism.
Thanks for bringing me in.
Pleasure to have you. We'll reach out. Stephen, who is standing for Alliance to Liberate Scotland in Aberdeen Donside, and of course will also be on the Highland or the North East list as well. Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks, Rory. Nice to be here.
Good. So if I could start, Allan, I'll come back. You old timers, I'll come to in a minute. But to our new guest, Allan, you know, I was talking to some of your fellow candidates during the week in the midweek prism, and I was saying to them, you know, what was it that brought you in the first place, not with Alliance to Liberate Scotland, that made you want to go into representative politics?
Well, it goes all the way back to when I left the army. I left the army and joined the SNP at the time, and I just got into politics to see what was going on locally in my area, see if there's anything I could do for my local area initially. Then through that, I was quite active in getting out and doing things, and I was asked to stand for Highland Council. So I put my name forward, got elected back in 2012 to 2017, and stood as an independent after that. I left the SNP and stood as an independent, was unsuccessful to get re-elected. So I just took time away. I was just carrying on doing my own jobs. Then I, 5 years ago, had my little boy, and I got custody of my little boy as well. So I took basically 4 years away from anything, and decided to get back into it again. You know, he's old enough to go to school. He's kind of his own little master, and I'm able to get out and do things now. And I thought, you know, I'll put my name forward for Parliament, not thinking at any moment, you know, that I would be successful, because obviously I was with the Alpha Party, and I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to be successful in getting it, but at the time I was. And then we know the history from there, really. We had conversations with Eva and a few of my other candidates that were with Alpha, and then I got a lovely phone call from Eva saying, "Do you want to come across?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely."
Well, welcome, and you're a great addition, shall I say, Allan, and the people of Moray will be lucky if they get someone like you representing them at Holyrood. Stephen, yourself, welcome. And you of course, you came as an independent. You were going to stand, you were so motivated, you wanted to stand as an independent under no party label to start with. What was it that made you want to stand first for public office?
I've never wanted to do it, to be honest with you. But I was injured in 2021. A lot of people in the North East will know my story. I was injured by the COVID vaccine. So, as you know, there's been no recognition for people injured by the COVID vaccine or people that have died from it. There's been lots of recognition for people that have been injured or died from COVID itself. So I've basically been motivated to stand up for people like myself, get some recognition and get some help. So that's basically why I first decided to stand. But obviously issues in the North East have cropped up as well with oil and gas and stuff like that. So it's kind of motivated to get something done, and hopefully I can make a difference and make Scotland a better place for everyone.
Well, welcome to the podcast, and may the people of Aberdeen and Donside support you. Moving on, it's been quite a week, Eva, and nothing greater. When you're talking of Holyrood, this week our friends in the Reform Party decided it was time to release their manifesto. Lord Offord, there's a good social name, Lord Offord. They put out it was quite a manifesto, Eva, and it's something I'd like to go into in great detail. What parts did you pick? Did you pick out? I don't mean necessarily as good, but what bits hit you in the face when you saw it at first?
Well, can I say that what hits me in the face today is the quality of both Allan and Stephen as candidates for the Alliance to Liberate Scotland, because they both want to do what it says, liberate Scotland. And the fact that Allan is here with experience from his years of service and his experience previously as an elected politician will clearly not only stand him in good stead, but makes him an ideal candidate in Moray, because he's a man of the people, but he's also got worldly experience and actually great vision and initiative. But Stephen, you've stolen the show, and we've only just started with those absolutely classic words. I never wanted to be a politician. That makes you an ideal politician, because that's exactly what people want to hear.
Yes, absolutely.
Reform. Well, did you all a favour? I said this earlier before we started, and I read Lord Offord's speech. 15 pages of patronising guff, and he doesn't mean a word of it, because in the midst of it, what he says is, this is a country where our political class created a welfare economy which does not create wealth, where work does not always pay more than welfare, where 93% of Scots thinks the NHS needs significant reform. Our world-famous Scottish education has become not outstanding any longer, but average. There's a chronic shortage of affordable housing, where uncontrolled, low-skilled immigration has destabilised our communities, and where our GDP per head is 25% below Sweden. Now, clearly, we're not likely to agree with his analysis in the main, but he does make a couple of good points in respect of why is it that Scotland is in the condition that it's in. And he dodges the issue, because the real issue is, of course, the constitutional question. Because all he's got to say about that is that in 1999, the state spent 34 billion in Scotland. Today, that figure is 118 billion. However, Scotland spends more than it earns, because what he completely omits from his equation is the fact that Scotland sends its money to Westminster, and we get back less than we pay in, because we're subsidising the rest of the United Kingdom. But there are a lot of frightening aspects in his speech and in the manifesto to do with particularly workers' rights. If you read between the lines, he's talking about making business succeed. What that means is removing workers' rights, if they can, in terms of the number of hours that you work in a week, minimum wage, all that sort of stuff. These are all the things that will be targeted, because he's there as a member of the House of Lords. He's part of the nobility. He's part of the elite now, if you like, and his job is to prolong their positions and their privilege. And the policies that he's announcing are designed to stir up hatred. They certainly are. He targets immigration particularly, when he's one of the unionists responsible for ensuring that powers over immigration stay in Westminster. The Scottish Parliament does not have any power in respect of immigration at all. It should do, and I'm sure if it did, there would be more sensible policies than are currently in place. But overall, bad news for Scotland if Reform are elected, and we know that Reform will be elected in some places if both votes go to the SNP. So
Absolutely.
If Reform are elected, you can blame John Swinney and those around him for that result.
Absolutely. On the money as usual, Eva. Phil, some of the highlights for me on it were they want to reduce the amount of first past the post seats from 73 down to 57. They want to put in law that there will be no referendum for the next decade. No matter what happens, you're not allowed a referendum. And they also want a 10-yearly review of the Scotland Act. In other words, they want to be chipping bits away bit by bit So, I mean, it's already pretty bad devolution, but they want to neuter it completely and just turn it into a big toon council.
Aye, and we're not a colony, honest mister. Clearly, they're just treating us like a colony because that's what we are effectively. And I love that we can have individuals like Allan and Stephen who are not tied to policies being imposed upon them from a central core, from a small think tank like we had with the Cabal and the SNP, but instead can abide by our only policy, independence, nothing less, and therefore are able to focus on local issues specific to the region. I mean, this message can't be put out there strongly enough. Highlanders in the northeast, and I lived in Turfins for a while up in Aberdeenshire. The Highlander and northeast folk alike, their needs are different from the central belt, and that applies across Scotland. There needs to be more power granted to local authorities to manage their own affairs. For example, things like ferries are not critical to Stirlingshire and most of the central belt, but in the Highlands, it's not a service, it's a lifeline. So these priorities, fisheries in the northeast, they're oil and gas in the northeast, actually all over Scotland because we all benefit. But that's what we really, really need. We need people who understand their local areas, their regions, and the regional autonomy should be tilted towards what's best for the folk in that area. And that's why we need that adaptability, that uniqueness, and that understanding of your own local area rather than have people parachuted in. Reform, as you've just pointed out, are just trying to impose policies on us that were written in London for the benefit of the Brits. It's as simple as that. And when you look at the goals, our top priorities are supposed to be cutting income tax, aye, for the rich, reform the NHS, which means privatisation, reduce welfare spending, screw the poor, shut down Quango's public bodies that operate at arm's length from the government, such as health boards, again, privatise the NHS, and make Scotland the most successful part of the UK. Aye, for who? For the billionaires to asset strip it. And why? Because Scotland is the richest part of Britain, a Britain that, if it ever was great, ceased to be so a long time ago. Now, the cost of living they're talking about, they want to align our income tax system with Britain, which means it would be reduced from 6 bands to 3 bands. So basically treating us like a colony, and cut rates by up to 3 pence below levels south of the border. Now, immediately, they want to cancel planned increase on council tax, which is one of the few ways that local authorities can raise income, because of the 35 fiscal and monetary levers, the Scottish government have very, very, very few. And that's one of the ones that were granted. And of course, they're beaten up with it every time. On the economy, and they want to say form a Department of Government Efficiency to cut waste and duplication. In other words, privatisation again. Then reallocate the 1 billion currently spent on net zero projects and the 65.5 billion spent on 132 Quangos to fund tax cuts. To fund tax cuts? To what? More investment in England, or energy schemes and investment to enrich reform supporters and support reform funders. They want to phase out the land and buildings transaction tax, which is Scotland's equivalent of stamp duty, and they just want to anglify us. And they want to replace annual property taxes, the revenues of which are to be handed directly to local authorities. So they want to meddle with our affairs and tell us how to run our part of the country, modelled on how they want England to go in a privatisation orientated bent. I mean, it goes on and on. The NHS and care don't even go there. That will be absolutely slashed and destroyed. These people cannot be trusted. More than ever, we need to take our own country back and start creating the kind of Scotland that we want to live in, a fair and socialist democracy.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a couple of things they want to do, Alan, as Phil's alluded to. They're trying to make us the exact same as England. They want to bring back prescription charges. They want to scrap the top tax bands. They keep putting this myth, them and the Tories, that Scotland's the highest tax place in the UK, when that is an absolute lie. Because when you factor in things like prescription charges, university fees, no bridge tolls, etc., lower council tax, it's not true. But they want to bring in, lower the tax, the the tax bands so that the rich, as Phil alluded to, get a tax rise. And also the same with the council tax high bands. They want to bring it into line with England. So the people with the really big houses are not paying that bit more. It's just scandalous.
Yeah, it's. I mean, I was reading it, catching up on reading what their manifesto was, and I just had to quickly scan through it, and there's not much difference from their main UK manifesto in there. It's the way they're wording things that catch people on there, because I mean, the people like us, we can read into that and go, yeah, well, that's privatisation. And this is why it's going to make things worse for you. They absolutely want to privatise the NHS. They want to make it an insurance-based system, and for the whole of the UK. And that's only the same thing again. It's going back into allowing the rich pals to get richer. The breaking up of the tax system to make it a three-tier tax system, which is the same with the UK. Yes, again, it's to give tax cuts to the rich pals, but in reality, I mean, I would probably say we need more tax bans to get people out of the austerity that we're all in. I mean, wages themselves in the UK, but in Scotland aren't high enough for what people have to live on. So we really need to. I don't think we should be bashing them. I think we should be politely pointing out the errors of what they've got in their manifesto, because a lot of the stuff that's in their manifesto is already going on anyway. You know, there are things there to make things easier for people, but they don't want to tell people that. And I was reading in there, going through the different areas. They go on about farming and things like that. Well, I went along to a hustings a week or so ago, and it was all specifically for farming issues, and it was all farmers and crofters that were there. The only people that didn't turn up to that was Reform and Labour. You know, everyone else turned up. We had pretty much every other party. We had individuals, independents tipped up to that. And I mean, for myself, not being part of the farming community, it was quite highlighting the fact of the issues that are bothering them. And you know, there are areas that need looked at, and I would probably say that the only thing that I would slightly agree on within their manifesto is the net zero issue, because the UK government, they keep trying to blame it on the SNP in there, and you know, we all know the Scottish government have to do what Westminster tell them to do. So it's not Scottish government net zero policy; it's a UK government net zero policy, and you know, that is costing us massively in different areas, especially in the northeast region for in Aberdeen, especially for the oil and gas sector. They wanted this just transition. I use that very loosely, because the just transition is supposed to be a graduated way of transitioning people from oil and gas into, and again, I'll use this very loosely as well, renewable energy. I call it alternative energy personally, because that's what it is, because the renewable energy that they call still needs oil and gas to help them run as well. There's more I could go into that there, but you know, I've got to leave some for other people to talk about as well.
Yeah, I mean, that on your net zero, I agree on that wholeheartedly. I was listening to someone interviewing Miliband, and it's cost hundreds of billions what they've done, but they've worked out that the UK actually produces less than 1%. And even if you get rid of it all, it's less than 1% for the world. Why would you decimate your economy for that? It just doesn't bear thinking about. Stephen, the guys have covered quite a lot of things, but one of the other ones they want to get rid of is the Scottish Land Commission, because they're worried the rich landowners, of course, don't like the idea of any kind of regulation over what they can do in their land or what they can have on their land, etc., etc. But it just seems that the Reform Party, and if we vote if SNP 1, SNP 2 folks, you're going to get a lot of Reform MSPs, they just want to help one section, and it is not the working class.
Absolutely. And I honestly believe that Reform are going to get candidates in the northeast of Scotland just because mad Ed, decimating oil and gas. People in the northeast are fed up. Everyone's losing their jobs, and it needs to stop. It's already been proven that we're buying oil back from Norway at double the price. I mean, it's utter madness. The people of Scotland should be thriving because of our energy rich, but it's just been pulled from under our feet, and it's got to stop, and it has to stop ASAP before the country's before the country dies. You know what I mean? And that's why we're all here and standing up for Scotland, because we want Scotland to be one of the best countries in the world to live in, to work in. So yeah, we need to get things sorted as soon as possible, and we've got the opportunity to do that in May. So let's get it done. Let's get Scotland back in being the best country in the world. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Here. I mean, one of the things I would say, and I am concerned, like every other sensible Scot, for the people in the oil and gas industry. But the less oil and gas that the English are taking out and stealing down to England means all the more for us when we get independence, folks. So let's get independence quick, get the jobs back, get the investment back, and start getting the money into our bank. But in this election time, Eva, you wonder what's going on. We're talking about energy. Now, we know that Scotland in some days produces enough renewable alternative energy, if we go with Allan's name for it, to power all of Scotland. We're actually exporting so much energy. And yet we've been hearing Labour for quite some time just now shouting about wanting us to get nuclear power. We already generate enough with hydro, with wind, with everything. And you say, why would they want to do that? Well. It turns out who's absolutely funding the Labour Party, the British Labour Party in Scotland, but the nuclear industry. No wonder, Eva, they're promoting it. This is it. Our politicians are bought and sold, whether it be for English gold, nuclear gold, Israeli gold, whatever it is, they're bought and sold very easily.
Well, this is what we said earlier about reform. Who are they? What are they for? Who do they prioritise? Who are they looking after? Who do they plan to look after? And that was evident throughout their manifesto, what their plans were, who they were targeting, because one of their policies is to cut social security spending and impose rigorous face-to-face assessments of claimants. They go on to say other stuff in respect, particularly of justice, which got my goat. They want to abolish the Scottish Sentencing Council in favour of direct oversight of sentencing by ministers. So Reform want to move to the right wing for their own purposes, or further right wing than they already are. But Labour don't have a left or a right position at all on anything now, because they make it up as they go along. And what they're clearly now doing is reacting to those who fund them and doing the work that the funders want them to do, and prioritising the interests of those who finance them. There's obviously a lot of controversy already about various senior Labour people and money that came from different sources and funding of the election of MPs, the choice of candidates, and how that was all engineered and manipulated on behalf of Keir Starmer behind the scenes by Morgan McSweeney and others. And now we see that they're funded in essence by friends of the nuclear lobby and that are the nuclear industry. And that just goes entirely against what people expect politicians to do. Was it Jenna Skinner who was told off for saying the other half of the House are lying, and then he said, okay, then I'll say that half of them are not liars. This is why people don't like party politics anymore. It's why we didn't want to be a political party, but we had to be for the purposes of the list vote. And that's the only reason that the Alliance is a registered political party. Otherwise, we'd all be standing as independents for independence, because that's the one thing that unites us, is independence. And it's all the more important when you see these shenanigans, these funding issues being exposed to, sunlight, the greatest disinfectant. It's all the more important these days that people are able to choose from candidates who have integrity, who are honest, and who will tell you what they're there for. So in my campaign, I'm saying to folk, independence, nothing less, independence, nothing else. But I want to look at all the other areas that are personal and local to me. But it's why Scotland needs folk like independence for independence. That's made very clear and plain by the scandals that are unfolding every day in respect of politicking and money. And Phil always says, follow the money, and he's never wrong. Here we are again. Remember, we found out, was it the Liberal Democrats that were getting money from the Big Pharma, which might have explained why they supported the gender recognition reform and puberty blockers and all that stuff. This is just more of the same. Vested interests, paying for power, paying for influence.
Yeah, it is. It's quite disgusting, Phil. I mean, when England want weapons of mass destruction, every poll that's been done in Scotland says we don't want weapons of mass destruction, and certainly not on the Clyde. England wants nuclear power stations. Scotland again says we don't want nuclear power stations, and we certainly don't want them in our land. But England wants it, so what England wants, Scotland gets. That's the reality. Another reason why we've got to get out. They're bought and sold, whether it be by the nuclear, by Labour Friends of Israel, all these different Big Pharma, they're bought and sold. Can you say that Alliance to Liberate Scotland will never be bought and sold by the big lobbyists?
Absolutely, because we're not the kind of party that, for politicians to preen themselves and show the plumage off, they need policies. We're an organisation that's based on one principle and one principle only: independence, nothing less. A vehicle designed to disintegrate once we get independence. Remember, Alex Salmond said, if SNP deconstructed after we get independence, I'd go for it, so long as our people were free, because I trust the Scottish people, as we do, to make the right decisions going ahead. So when I look at this and I see energy being discussed, the fact remains, I've spent 15 years in the energy industry writing papers for the government on on carbon capture and storage with Lord Oxburgh and some of the top minds in Britain on how to use carbon capture and storage. Also 15 years with BP, Shell, Statoil, specialising in offshore installations and projects, FPSOs and the like, including refineries. So and I worked in Norway with Statoil and a joint venture with BP. And without a shadow of doubt, an independent Scotland's energy model should be almost exactly the same as the Norwegian model. It does not include nuclear because we don't need nuclear. England needs nuclear. And where do they want their nuclear power stations? Exactly where they want their nuclear weapons, as far away from London and the people of England as possible. So we're dumped to 35 miles from Glasgow city centre for the weapons, and way up in the north of Scotland. And that's where they want them. They want them as far away from the population bases in England as possible. The model that we should be adopting is the Norwegian every barrel counts, using Inconel stainless steel networks and direct current ring mains, start manufacturing much, much more in Scotland and independent, and we sell the oil and gas. And in a mountainous country like Scotland and Norway with plenty of water, we should be using hydroelectric pump storage exactly the way Norway does. It's absolutely, we also need to invest more. We've got a great facility way up in the north of Scotland towards Shetland and Orkney for tidal and wave work. And we broke the record for one of the difficulties with the tidal generators was the tide was so strong in the Pentland Firth that we couldn't tie the bloody thing to the ground. We couldn't anchor it because it was so powerful. So no, we should be streets ahead. I would recommend folk look at Beyond Nuclear, who broke this. And Rob Edwards in the Ferret, he also laid out where this money came from and what it was all about. And this is Anis Sarwar accepting this from Stonehaven, which is a lobbying firm which represents the owner of Scotland's last nuclear power station. So it's a con. We don't need it, and they can sling their hook in an independent Scotland. Oh, aye, and they can take their nuclear weapons with them.
Absolutely. I mean, I saw a phone-in with Lord Offord, and it was good. You could see it was almost like watching Muhammad Ali box, and this caller come in to ask him a question, and he was sort of setting him up with the right, coming out, getting ready for the left cross, and he was asking him about, well, where are you going to put all this nuclear waste? And the offer was, oh, well, the new nuclear waste, that's smaller reactors and there's not so much, you can just put it in the sea. And this guy was obviously an expert, and he came in and absolutely said, you're going to put it in the sea, what about the fisheries, what about blah, blah, blah. You've not thought this through, you don't have a clue. And he just kept going about, oh, yeah, well, the reactors are smaller, there's not as much waste, but where's that? He says, you're going to put the waste in England? Well, no, we'll put it in, we'll put it somewhere, we'll get it sorted, don't worry about it. The technologists will take care of it, trust me, I'm a unionist. So, it's just, and the tragedy, some people will trust him because he's a unionist. But Alan, it's so often, these politicians, particularly the British-based ones, they're bought very easily. We know in Scotland, every unionist is bought and sold for English gold, but they're bought for all sorts of other things. It's imperative we get this kind of lobbying out of our politics.
Yeah, I put out one of my stuff in the past, one of my posts on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, all over the place. And I quoted Robin Williams saying that politicians should wear sponsor jackets to know exactly who's sponsoring them for everything that they do. But Scotland already with all the oil and gas and the alternative energy with wind farms and stuff, we're producing somewhere in the region of about 3 times the capacity than what Scotland actually needs. So we're already producing what we need anyway, and the leftover we can sell on. The problem being that we're seeing up here in the Highlands and all over Scotland really, is we've got all onshore wind farms that some of the companies are paid to switch them off. Now that in itself is wasting billions of pounds, because these companies are going, yeah, we'll switch them off. You've got to keep us reimbursed for all this money that we're not going to get. So that's just a wastage of money that's going on, and it's not down to the fact that there's the wind element is bad. It just shows the fact that we don't need any other energy. We've already got the wind, we've got tidal, we've got solar, we've also got especially up here, we've got the hydro schemes, and there was a massive hydro scheme planned back when I was on the council into Loch Ness. And, I went down to it, it was a huge scheme. And this thing alone would have, the way they were talking, we would have powered pretty much most of Scotland just off of this one scheme from that's going back and forth into Loch Ness and back up to another pontoon area that they have. The modular reactors for nuclear, though, we don't need them. It is lobby groups that are doing this with politicians. What we're seeing is they want to spend money on things like this, when in actual fact what they should be spending the money on is upgrading the network that's there already, because the network is degrading away. It has been for decades. And whilst we've up here in Inverness, we've got the Ardisia plant who are they're doing the cabling system for the offshore wind farms. That in itself could be done for redoing the cabling for Scotland to have our own national grid, and then we can sell this electricity to England, to Europe, because we're already producing, I think, about 20% of the energy for Europe as well. So we're already making enough energy. It's as for these politicians that are accepting funding from all these lobbying groups, it should stop. It should just be straight blank in the law that no lobby groups can give funding to politicians or political parties.
You're absolutely right. When independence comes, the first thing we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, is put a big lecky meter on the River Tweed for England to pay for their electricity. So I hope in England you better get lots of Scottish 50p pieces. We don't accept English money, by the way. Scottish 50p pieces to put in the meter so you can pay for your electricity instead of stealing it. Stephen, you've spoken earlier how you're going to be a champion for the oil and gas, and that's quite right. being a champion for it is fine, but being a paid lobbyist isn't quite the same thing. Now, it must be close to your heart. We heard the last time Labour were trying to sell us a pup. They've been saying the same, but Scotland's losing out on thousands of jobs because they won't take these nuclear power stations. You're in Aberdeen. We were promised thousands of jobs in Aberdeen for GB Energy. Can you tell us, Stephen, how many thousand jobs have been created by GB Energy in Aberdeen?
I'll be honest, I don't even want to go there. I mean, they're not even got an office. I think they were speaking about going into one of the offices in Marshall Square. So I think it holds about 60 people. So there's your answer right there.
That's more than I thought there was.
Well, I could be over-exaggerating with 60. It could be 20, you know what I mean? I don't know. I don't believe what the Labour Party says anyway. So, anyway, we need Scottish people to be running these things. And I got sent a video by Phil that I watched with Phil speaking about the energy guys, and I think Leslie Riddick was there, Jim Sillars, and it inspired me because the energy sector, it doesn't need to be run by politicians, because there's people out there that are intelligent enough. I mean, obviously the infrastructure has to be put there by politicians, but there's people there that can run the energy sector without politicians being involved, without the globalists being involved. And I believe that we could have the infrastructure for our energy to be the best energy in the world, just by listening to that video that Phil sent me. Because I believe we honestly do have people in this country that can run it for us. And it's going to benefit every single person in Scotland. And I honestly believe that. Getting away from the GB energy, that's just they're throwing us a little piece of bread just to stop us moaning about all the jobs we're losing in oil and gas. It's absolute nonsense. We need the oil and gas back up. And if you believe the mainstream media, there's at least 40 years before we can run fully on solar power, wind power, wave power, whatever we do. So let's get the oil and gas done before the infrastructure comes in for the clean energy.
Yeah.
So let's get the oil and gas back up and running. Yeah.
We'll do. I've got one. I actually want to speak particularly to Phil and Eva later about last Saturday and the coming together of a lot of you. But first, one other thing before that, I get to that question, Eva, because the one thing I've been scouring the papers, looking at Norway, what's happening just now, and there doesn't seem to be any panic about anything there. They've got the oil and gas. They've got a population similar to Scotland. However, we've been told that they're trawling this week, that we may be having rationing of fuel. Now, I can't understand this one, and I'm again viewing this actually as a false flag, Eva, that this is to make us hate the Iranians to try and justify their warmongering, because we've got that much bloody oil. We sell it and give it away. Well, we don't sell it. The English sell it for us, but there's enough. We should not have a fuel shortage.
I nearly owed you a pound there. The Iranians, though, have said that the Straits of Hormuz, through which I think is at a fifth of the world's oil goes, are closed only to the US, Israel and their allies. So that's a bit of a difficulty for the UK. But in terms of whether or not oil will be, or fuel will be rationed in Norway, there is one very clear and very fundamental difference between them and us, and we all know what it is. But we missed out on an oil fund that they have. We could still have an oil fund for future generations were we a self-determining country. We should have had a wind fund. We should have had a wave fund. What have we got instead? If you're sitting on an oil rig out in the Norwegian waters and you were gazing onshore to Norway, you would see a people with a decent standard of living. You would see not too bad figures in relation to homelessness and ill health or drug use or addiction to alcohol. But if you were to jump onto a corresponding oil rig in Scottish waters and gaze ashore to Scotland, what would you see? You would see a homeless crisis, you would see a housing crisis, you would see parents with their backside hanging out their drawers, you would see mums crying because they can't put food on the table and they can't buy wee extras like special holidays, haircuts, birthday presents. You would see food banks and baby banks and school clothing banks. You would see pensioners going up the street for their messages, counting out the change that's in their purse to see whether or not they've got enough to buy their messages. You would see single working men shivering in their homes because they can't pay to put the gas fire on. Those same men would open the kitchen cupboard and see nothing there but the dregs in the bottom of a bottle of tomato sauce and maybe a tin of beans and maybe half a pint of milk. That's the reality for hundreds of thousands of Scots today. And that picture is not replicated in Norway. And that is exactly why we need to have our independence. And I can't say any more than that because it just gets too emotional and too frustrating.
Yeah. Fuel rationing particularly in Scotland, would be ridiculous. But what would be a great idea? I just had a flash of inspiration, Phil. Supposing, say, somewhere in the Central Belt, like Grangemouth, we put an oil refinery. We could increase capacity and put petrol out there. Why didn't someone think of that?
It's true. It's absolutely true. And we talked extensively on this one. We'll talk more about it. We've been onto this for quite some time. We, as an independent Scotland, will need a refinery. We'll need a steel mill. We will need all of the normal types of infrastructure links, energy links with our neighbours, so we can export our energy. Ferry routes that are international, not just to serve the islands and islands. And this is what I loved about the Yes United. We'll come on to it later, I know as you mentioned. But in terms of energy, we are one, if not the richest part of Europe in terms of energy. We have everything. We are many times over energy. So we can provide enough energy for us many times over our own people. It's been stolen by the corporations and by the British government. The people of Scotland were approaching 1 in 4 kids in poverty. And one of the things that you'll find out if you listen to Jim Sillars, which everybody should, the speech he did at the end of the Yes United IFS event was just took the roof off. It's almost 25% as well of young people, maybe a bit more, who feel there is no hope. That is a damn disgrace. Remember how we were buoyed as young boys and girls, the future was ours, we could do anything? We've taken that away from our children and grandchildren, and that should be a source of shame for everybody. And it's why we need to go off our backsides and do something about it. So I applaud Allan and Stephen and Eva and all the rest of them that are standing up to be counted. And here's another thing. In the Yes movement and independence movement, we need to be very, very careful. We're very quick to snipe petty jealousies and petty issues. It's embarrassing. Remember who our enemies are. The people that are your enemies are not the ones that are trying to do something for the freedom of our people in our country. Our enemies are those that would keep us on our knees. The people that take the hope away from our children and the people that force 1 in 4 virtually in our country to live in poverty. That's where the rage needs to come. And yet that anger needs to be used as an energy to free Scotland. So yeah, one of the most energy rich country in Europe. Norway's close, but because of our coastline and our potential for renewable tidal and wind, and incidentally solar and particularly wind, because of its intermittent nature, the only reason we've got much of this is because England wants it. We don't need it. It should only form a maximum of about 8% from most of the analysts reckon. That's the biggest part that wind should pay in Scotland's energy model. No more. But why have we got so much more? Because that's what England wants. And they can sell it across the sea whenever they need it, because we're jetting their energy when the wind's blowing here that they can sell. It's an absolute con. And of course, there's the classic NIMBY philosophy in England. Not in my backyard. We'll just plonk it up there in Scotland, where the wee Germans don't have a voice and they can do nothing about it. So hell mend them.
Yeah. But that's the thing, Alan. We've spoken here in this podcast. We've got massive amounts of oil and gas under the ground. We're creating and generating all this electricity. We've got generating all this gas. We've got enough sometimes in our natural resources to power the whole of Scotland. And yet they're talking about rationing our petrol. We've got the most expensive electricity in Europe, the most expensive gas. There is something not right with this equation. And we know in this programme, this podcast, what it is. We need to get that message across to the voters for May the 7th. They need to think about that. Those simple things alone should tell you that we need independence, Alan.
Yeah, absolutely. The independence is going to be the biggest key issue for us to get on top of all finances in Scotland. But whilst everyone was talking there, I've got an app on my phone, and it's petrol prices. Now I keep a track of that to see where the cheapest prices are for me to go and fill my car up and things. And I'm looking at it right now, and what I'm seeing is it's went up by 30 pence. Which on a gallon and stuff like that, it all builds up. But that's not the first time I've seen that up in the 160s. This happened a few years ago. It was in the 160s, and everyone down in England are moaning that they're hitting 140 for their fuel. I'm sitting there going, that's what we've normally got up here anyway.
Mm.
We're normally sitting at about 130, 138, 140 for our fuel prices. We're used to Westminster and the rest of England taking advantage of Scotland. So when we get independence, I think it's going to be more of a culture shock for the people in Scotland by saying, guess what? We're able to have the fuel prices down. We're able to do this. Being independent, we can choose whether or not we get involved in the likes of Ukraine, Iran, the whole thing that's going on. Should we look after people in a defensive way? Absolutely. That's the key point, though. In a defensive way, unlike the way that the UK do things, they're always on the offensive. Being a former soldier myself, the soldiers themselves are told you're going out there to protect people, when in actual fact, having coming out of it and looking back into it, I'm now seeing that a lot of the time it's been us that have been the aggressor, and I say that as NATO as a whole on all the operational tours I've did. As soldiers, we felt we were going out there to look after people, and it's the likes of that that's also costing the prices to go up as well, because the amount of money that is spent on defence is astronomical. It is ridiculous. If we weren't paying for Trident, which we don't own, there's America that own that really, but we're paying trillions for Trident that we don't need. There's conventional submarines that we could be using, which cost us a fraction of the price. So all of those kind of areas, we need to get on top of that element. And the only one key thing that's going to get us to do that is for us to have independence for Scotland. There's nothing else that's going to be able to get us to stop what's going on.
Stephen, you live up in Aberdeen, up there in the northeast. Did you ever think you would see a headline saying there may be fuel rationing because we're running out of fuel?
In my opinion, it all stems back to the globalists trying to terrify you into stuff. We've seen what they're doing in Glasgow. They're trying to push in a 15-minute cities. So you've got to try and read between the lines sometimes. Is this what they're pushing? Even more so now. Thankfully in Aberdeen, and I spoke about that yet, but it's coming. I just think we need to keep the globalists out of politics, especially in Scotland. End of story. Scotland needs to be run by the people of Scotland, and that's it, first and foremost. And we need to do everything we can to make sure that every single person in Scotland is going to thrive. Get rid of poverty if we can, which I know we'll work to if we do get voted in. So, yeah, to be honest, I don't care about the rest of the world. I care about Scotland. We need to sort our own backyard out first. The poverty thing, a lot of people speak about it. I'm actually living it, so I know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm sick of having money in my bank account. Sometimes having to choose between heating and eating. So, yeah, if anyone can speak about it, I can. Obviously, I lost my job in oil and gas 4 years ago because of my injury. So, I know exactly where the money is going. You sometimes have to choose between paying bills and buying food, paying for your heating, you know what I mean? So, I know I'm not the only person in Scotland that's suffering at the moment. So, let's get some money in people's pockets so they can pay for stuff, you know?
Correct.
Focus on our own people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance. I mean, in Spain, they only create olive oil, and yet fuel here is cheaper than in the UK, who has abundance of it. There's a reason. There's a reason why they call it Treasure Island. And the money's not going to the people. It's not going. We've not got the greatest infrastructure in the world. We've not got the greatest pensions in the world. In fact, far from it. The worst and the worst. It's going to the corporations and the 1%. They're raping us and pillaging us. Anyway, I want to go into a few other things, but before I do that, I want to go back a week, Eva. Now, I know you and Phil couldn't be here last week, and I've got to say some people miss you. Why they miss you, I do not know, but they did. They missed you. Some people sent in, they thought you'd been sacked or something. They would get rid of you, as if we could. Can you tried having to get rid of them? I can't get rid of them. It's impossible. But you were at this, everything that is the epitome of what we have believed in and been spouting on here for years, which is unity. You went on a unification trip down to Glasgow, yeah. and I believe you left a wee bit inspired by it, shall we say?
Oh, that's putting it mildly. By way of a wee bit of background for those who don't know, I've believed in Scottish independence for most of my life, and I started probably being indoctrinated into the concept by a brilliant history teacher in primary school, as well as by my mum and dad, who were in the SNP in Crieff in the 1960s. But that meant that I was a teenager in the 70s, and I helped with the 2 campaigns in 1974. And so I felt the power and the optimism and the potential of Scotland from a very early age. But in the 1980s and 1990s, some of that time I was an SNP councillor, but for several years over that period, I attended the annual SNP conference, and I heard inspiration from all the greats of our movement, from Winnie Ewing, Alan McCartney, George Reid, the quieter souls too, Margaret Ewing and Alex Salmond, obviously. But the most memorable speech I heard in my life was Jim Sillars in, I think, 1994. And his finale was that there were mothers sitting in households in Govan, for example, I think he quoted, with tears running down their face because they didn't know where the money was coming from to buy a pair of school shoes for their children, etc. And his final sentence was, "It is the purpose of the Scottish National Party to wipe every unnecessary tear from every Scottish cheek." Now, that was 32 years ago. But that is not now the best speech I've ever heard. Last Saturday's speech from Jim Sillars, especially his finale, overtook that to the extent where there was probably a tear running down every cheek in that hall. If you've not listened to it, you've got to do it, but listen to it over and over and over again and capture the power in the man and the vision that he's got, his imagination, his understanding, and most of all, his humanity. And it's humanitarian values and respect for each other as individuals that I would say he encapsulated in that speech. But he linked it to the need and the opportunity and the strength that there is in our movement for self-determination, for independence. And nobody who's a true independence supporter could listen to that speech and fail to either be moved or to agree with every word that he said and be fired up to do all that we can to bring about unity of purpose, because that is the only method by which our country will regain her independence. So sometimes you have to make decisions that stick in your craw, that you'd much rather not face, and you want to walk away. And I've faced many moments like that in my life when things have happened that I couldn't control or I felt I couldn't influence. And I've had to thole and tolerate things beyond imagination at times. So recent events have been not dissimilar, but the cause comes before everything. But today I'm deliberately wearing my Women Won't Wheesh t-shirt because I would like to remind everybody that this woman won't wheeshed, and regardless of the opinions of others within our movement or our party, the defence of single-sex spaces remains top of my political agenda, and if anybody wants to take me up on it, bring it on, because I have maintained my principles and my integrity, and this is about independence, nothing less. I want me and women like me, who are other candidates in Alliance, in that parliament, supporting and defending women's rights. But we're only going to do that properly when our country is independent and the constitutional question is off the table and people are able to elect politicians who do what they're required to do, and they're not bogged down in party loyalty and party squabbles and feuds. That's what's needed more than ever today.
Absolutely.
100%. Well said.
Absolutely. I'll tell you, the other one I remember with Jim Sellers was back in 2014. When at that time it was being discovered the 2 aircraft carriers that Gordon Brown had commissioned for his British bosses, what they were being seen as big white elephants. And Jim came up with the idea that Scotland, in the settlement after we won the victory in 2014, should take one of the aircraft carriers, call it the SS Robert Burns, and turn it into a hospital ship. And instead of projecting power, we should go and project soft power by going and doing cataract operations or going to places where they needed it and turn this war machine, this war boat, into a hospital ship. I mean, so magical. I mean, just a great idea. I mean, to have that kind of brain, Phil, where you could think those things right out the box.
It was an absolute joy and a pleasure to sit beside him and listen to him. In fact, I've got a copy of his book that everybody should check out. It's not that big, but what it does, it maps out the bigger picture on how we can get and take our independence. It's called The New Case for Optimism. And well, there you go. There it's there. And it's Jim Sellers' latest. And I'm about a third of the way through it. I should finish it this weekend. And I'm privileged enough that hopefully I'll be doing some work with Jim in the not too distant future. But yeah, Eva's 100% right. That was an inspirational event. And we were there. Because why were we there? Because we're all about unification. And for anyone who agrees, please watch some of the clips. It was in Oranmore at last Saturday. Read Jim's book. This organisation, the Independence Forum Scotland and Yes United, came together. They joined forces to organise a spring conference on Scotland's future. Then it was at Oranmore last Saturday. Now, Scotland's future was the name of that giant white elephant, the big white paper that was written for the 2014 referendum. And Jim spoke about it in his speech, and he was mentioning that why did it fail? Why hasn't there been an autopsy on this? Why haven't we understood why this failed and why it failed to enthuse the people of Scotland? And what I loved about what he said, he was absolutely bang on the money. He showed me before it kicked off, and in fact, I mentioned in my speech, my keynote speech at this event, page 113 of the Scotland's future tied the Scotland monetary system, the pound, to the English pound. If you are, and this came with the currency group were there, okay? I'll tell you more about these other groups, but they were saying if you're using another country's currency, you are not independent.
Correct.
It was a fundamental mistake. And what Jim pointed out, I mean, I thought I'd contributed to it because I know I arranged the military section, a draft with some senior British officers at my house with Angus Robertson and Luke Skipper. And we made a contribution and shaped what we thought would be a good idea and some of the contents of the military section of that white paper. Sent it off, never heard from them again, or spoke to them, never heard about it again. It did come out that kind of shape, but what Jim advised us was, and we know this for a fact, it was mostly written, it was Alex, but he mostly delegated it to Nicola. And she drove it, and it was written in civil servant parlance by civil servants. And as Jim says, it failed the political test because civil servants don't think that way. They wrote that to appease people. It was timid. It was meek. It did not get us going. It didn't persuade us. What we need, and this is, he went on, and I completely agree. The different components need to come together, and that's the unification we seek. We need a simple, unifying manifesto that we, in an electoral event, can take to the doors in the schemes, and we can show the people of Scotland, if you vote for independence, this is the kind of Scotland we will build. The think tanks, the IFS, the Yes United, the Salvo SSRG, Alliance to Liberate Scotland, Energy Scotland, the Currency Group, ISP, anybody should be welcome in this, and the petty squabbling must cease. There is one principle and one principle only. You heard Eva there. Her passion remains women's rights and the protection of free spaces, amongst other things, and disabled rights. And she has her priorities. Stephen and Allan have their priorities. And that's the kind of Scotland we want. We want people to unify under one principle. You don't get to tell anybody else what to think, what to do, how to perform, what to believe in. But we come together to create a manifesto that sets out the kind of Scotland we can live in. And these detailed issues we can take care of when we, the people of Scotland, vote on it, because I trust the people of Scotland. And had you been there last week, you would trust the people of Scotland too. Now, the electoral event is critical. And an independence party number one and a second independence vehicle on the list. Now, the list needs explained to a lot of folks. So instead of the crassly idiotic SNP 1 and 2 policy, which gets Labour, Tories and Reform elected, we would have a majority. Currently, it would be SNP if they play ball. But we have to force them to play ball because in the last 11 years, they've refused to play ball. So how do we do that? We start targeting the leadership. If we hadn't been hamstrung by the Electoral Commission and 2 years in the making, this idea and this organisation was, and we're barely 6 weeks old. We've got hundreds of members. We're marching on. We're doing the absolute best we can. We've got people like Tommy Sheridan in, and the good gentleman you see in front is Craig Murray. We've got people coming over from Alapa. We encourage all. We will not criticise anyone if their efforts are for an independent Scotland. All we would do is plead with them. Let's not bother with the infighting. Let's please don't be sidelined by that. Leave your ego at the door. Forget it. Forget about that. It's the cause that matters. It's what the poverty that Stephen spoke of, the needs in the northeast, and the lies that we've been told, and the wars that have been taken into wrongly that Allan spoke of. This electoral event needs a clear policy, a clear strategy. An SNP strategy is a lie. It will not get us independence. Isn't it funny they only mention it when we come towards elections? Then after we get this, we, the people, and the organisations that come together will build the Scotland that we want. Final couple of points. Hats off to the people that were involved. On Europe, there was Jeff Bush, Colin Fox, Dave Thompson. On the economy, Valerie Brown, Tim Rideout, William Thompson. On energy, Stuart Clements, John Proctor Sr. and Jr., and Simon Forrest, who was chair, and William Duguid, who organised it, and Sheena and all the rest of them. It was a magnificent effort, and it was exactly the shot in the arm that we in the independents need to understand that unification is the way forward. Stop the pettiness.
Correct. Can I just say, you'll notice all those names that Phil announced of all the different organisations, all pro-independence. We support them. We're set on here. We encourage it. We go to these things. Unlike some of you out there who block this podcast, for example, is blocked by numerous Facebook sites pretending to be pro-independence, but they're not. They're pro-one party. So you're either put your party first or put your nation first. That's the most important thing. So, guys, obviously I want to move on because the clock is usually beating us and we're overrunning as usual. But there was another thing this week. Now, I don't believe in coincidences, Alan, especially in politics. And we've got here one of the most unpopular wars going, where the British public, the Scottish public in general, are really against it. And lo and behold, at the down at in Faslane, we're hearing that a man and a woman, both Iranian spies, apparently before the trial, they've been already said they're Iranian spies who, in broad daylight at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, not very good spies, were trying to burst into to Faslane. We don't know why, but one, as I say, my cynicism kicks in. Broad daylight, 5 o'clock, breaking into a nuclear, and they just happened to be Iranians. You know, it was like, if we remember back to Salisbury, Salisbury, and the two Russians that left their passports behind when the attack came. I'm just a wee bit, shall we say, sceptical of this. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, obviously more investigation is done into it, but you know, I've seen a lot of things over my time of all this sort of stuff. You know, people could turn around and say it's a false flag, and it's, you know, it's been an Israeli agent that's went in there saying that it's going to be an Iranian. That it's not the first time they've done that in the past. That's speculation, but until a proper investigation is done, we don't really know. That all we're seeing is what the press and the headlines want us to read, because when it comes to the article, barely anybody's reading the actual article itself. They quickly go into it and they move on to the next topic. Could it have happened? Yeah, it could have. You know, anyone can break into any military sites. It's not hard to break into a military site, because you would think the military would be a lot more on the ball with these things, but unfortunately, they're not. You know, they patrol the perimeter, but they're not. You know, there's cameras and things like that in place, but the number of times I have seen soldiers climbing fences just to get into camps without even being caught by their bosses or anyone that was on security for that day is ridiculous. I've seen people in the security sector when I was in Germany. We were out doing runs. We've went out as a whole group of guys. These people have went away. They've bought similar looking PT attire that we had, and then through the run, they've joined the run that we've been in, and they've ran straight in with everyone else without anyone getting ID'd as they're coming in. That particular person walked straight into brigade headquarters and pointed a gun at the brigadier's head and said, "Your security's crap on this camp." And that's not just one camp. That is nearly every camp out there. So, whilst the military do an absolutely fantastic job with doing things, in the UK, they're lackadaisical. Their own security drops massively. And yeah, could it have been these Iranian spies? It could have been, but you know, there's no proper investigation went into it. We're only relying on what Westminster tell us, and I'm sorry, but I stopped trusting Westminster's views that these things are accurate, because the number of times they've said this is what's happening. We've been told Russian planes have been flying over the Highlands, or there's Russian boats coming into the Cromarty Firth. It turns out 2-3 months later that Westminster already gave them approval for to go there. But in the press, it was like, look, this is your security. Yep. If you didn't have the UK, they are defending you. These boats wouldn't be coming into your waters. Absolutely rubbish. 2 months later, they're telling us that they were invited in. Yep. So yeah, I personally, unless there's a full investigation, I don't believe one little bit at the moment.
No, it's kind of, but Stephen, Alan's right. A proper investigation. However, in this country, we already know every time it's mentioned on the news, they're talking about Iranian spies. The press are talking about Iranian spies, and it just so happens no one's buying into the Iranian war. Too much of a coincidence for me. What about you?
It goes back to the mainstream media thing. I mean, I'm part of a group of people that speak out about the vaccines that have been demonised for the last 5 years. Mad conspiracy theorists. So I take everything from mainstream media with a pinch of salt. You've got to look at both sides of the stories. I mean, I've heard that it was just two people that went up and asked if they could have a tour of the site. You've heard it's Israeli spies pretending they're Iranians. Will we ever find out the truth? I don't know. Probably not. Somebody's going to be a scapegoat for this. I don't know who it is. Certainly won't be me. But yeah, just let's try and read between the lines with anything in mainstream media. Yeah, that's all I'm going to say, because yeah, I don't trust them. They're all bought and paid for by the government. So
absolutely, I wouldn't be surprised if these two alleged Iranian spies end up in the same hidey hole as the Ukrainian rent boys and the Skirples. It wouldn't surprise me, and they just float away. I mean, if these were Iranian spies, Eva, more like Johnny English than James Bond, isn't it? To try at 5 o'clock in broad daylight to break into a nuclear facility. They're not very good spies, are they?
It's like, I don't know, what is it, the Keystone Cops or Laurel and Hardy or something. The report I read was that they had just gone in and asked if they could look around. They were standing at the gate and they were immediately lifted. Time will tell. But it seems to be that the man's Iranian and the woman's Romanian, so we'll see how that all pans out. What the press should have been talking about more than they were, or publicising more than they were the drugs deaths figures, because they came out this week and they're up by 8%. 1,146 drug-related deaths in Scotland in 2025. It's going up, not down. And that's when the Scottish Government has a task force and emergency plans and innumerable charities and organisations that are dealing with the question of drugs. So I would like to see more publicity surrounding what the Scottish Government has done, what they've been asked to do, and listening to folk like Anne-Marie Ward, whose ideas, plans and proposals are well thought out and far more likely to begin to succeed than the current regime, including drug treatment rooms. And just finally on that particular point, there's a consultation underway now as to whether there should be a drug treatment room in Edinburgh. But thus far, there are strong suggestions that the treatment room in Glasgow has in fact not had the success rates that it was planned or proposed or claimed that it would have. And instead, what the Scottish Government should be doing is plunging far more money into rehabilitation and looking at the root causes of addiction, which is primarily poverty and trauma related. And again, unless and until we're independent with the full economic resources of our country available to us, we will not tackle poverty at its root cause, and therefore all these other health issues and the heartbreak that it brings will prolong unnecessarily.
You can see, folks, this isn't like the BBC, where we start off talking about Iranian spies and we end up in drug deaths. That's the way. That's how we roll in here. But we don't. No script here, folks. There's no script. There's meant to be a wee guideline, but it never works out that way. What about you, Phil? Do you think Iranian spies are, tourists that just ask the wrong question at the wrong gate at the wrong time?
Yeah, it's an opportunity for the mainstream media to sensationalise and tell us what they want us to believe. And regardless of what this was, anyone who's a spy doesn't go up in their car with a pass that is allegedly the wrong pass, or and just ask to have a look around and say, "Oh, can we look around here? This is very nice." Come on, really? It's absurd. It's absurd. Whatever happens, Alan's right. We're all right. We don't know until there's an investigation, but Eva's point's absolutely bang on the money. we've got a pathetic effort at trying to fix the drug deaths in Scotland. Instead of watching the models that worked in Portugal and Switzerland and copying them, and what you do is there's a brilliant article with Joe Rogan with Gary about Gary Anslinger and Lady Day, and it was about the creation of the war on drugs, which came out on the death of prohibition, when this nasty racist piece of shit, Gary Anslinger, who hated drug abuse and hated black people, and Billie Holiday he persecuted and killed effectively. And it's an incredible piece of work by Johan Hari, who's a Swiss-English journalist, on Joe Rogan. Check it out, Lady Day. It's an incredible story, and it just encapsulates that drugs is born of poverty. Drug use is primarily born of poverty and abuse. That's what we should be fighting. And the answer to follow what Portugal and Switzerland did is to stop the war on drugs and do exactly what Eva had suggested, which is supporting the poor individuals involved. Build a support network to get them back into society, to support them, to stabilise them, to encourage them, to train them, to support them, to be there for them, so they don't fall further and further down this spiral. And what Stephen was talking about in terms of mainstream media, yes, mainstream media is lying to us, and we regularly talk about the list of alternative mainstream media issues, and quite often we throw it along the bottom of our podcast here. We'll do it at some point, whether it's now or in the future. But putting the mainstream media list out there are alternatives, plenty of alternatives out there where we can get our information. This is one of them. That's the list. If you want to understand what's going on in the world, and you'll see through a Scottish prism on there. Why? Because we are not mainstream media. We refuse to comply with what the Brits and the lobbyists, as you mentioned earlier, want us to talk about. We will talk about what's right for the people of Scotland, and even better, we'll regionalise it to make sure that the Highlands and Islands are served, the North East is served, and every part of Scotland. And the borders are often overlooked. If they shoots up the motorway right by them. You know, we have different policies that we need to put in place for the different parts of Scotland. We need to listen to our people, but most importantly, we need to come up with a strategy to get our independence, because it's getting worse and they don't give a damn.
And as Phil says, we don't comply. We don't even comply with the interview on here. We answer questions that we've not even been asked. But that's what makes it fun and makes it different. Things I wanted to cover, I don't really have time to now, but I'll just quickly, one of them was this from one of our great, James Campbell, one of our great followers and great supporters of the show. He found that this is in the parliamentary website, Scotland is a region of England. How do you feel about that, folks? Yeah, Scotland is a region of England. That's officially in Westminster. And the other one was this week, where there was people saying to Swinney he should be blocking the American planes that are landing, refueling, and going on to bomb civilians in an illegal war in Iran. John says, I don't have the power. No, you don't have the spine. You could stop it tomorrow. You own the airport. You can determine who lands on your ground and who doesn't. You own the airport, and you should not be helping in a war. So we haven't done that. But more importantly, this, ladies and gentlemen, our Eva, in demand. We're going to start charging actually for this soon. We should be a wee fee in here. Donate to our cause, donate to our fighting fund for the election. And they're charging a £5 a ticket, by the way, Eva. Yeah, I hope you're on £2.50, love. In Tanner's Lounge Bar in Edinburgh, and that's on Tuesday the 24th. Go along and see Eva, and ask the questions. Get some information for yourself. It'll help in the coming weeks and months of this election. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've enjoyed particularly meeting two of our new candidates in the upcoming election on May the 7th. And let me tell you, midweek, we'll have a few more for you to meet and greet and say hello and hear what they've got to say. But until we do see you, may you and yours please take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.